Good afternoon. Let me start by thanking all of you all for joining us here this afternoon for the celebration of the Morrill Act. Let me just tell you, I'm very excited to be here and have our institutions from across the state to celebrate this with us, both Tuskegee University and Alabama A&M. We've been working towards this celebration here now for a couple of months, and to see all of it to come together with the leadership that is assembled here in this room is quite refreshing for me. I would like to recognize some of our institutional representatives that are here. If you will, when I call your name, will you stand? I know that Dr. Luther Williams was supposed to be here, but something at the last minute caused him to not be able to attend. He's the provost at Tuskegee University. But Tuskegee is duly represented by Dr. Walter Hill, who is the Dean of the College of Agriculture, Environment, and Nutrition at Tuskegee. Dr. Hill, you saying? And also Dr. Virginia Caples and Dr. Sylvia Stovall. They were here from Alabama A&M. They had to leave to get back on the road to Huntsville, but we're happy to have them here. Uh-oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Stovall, I'm sorry. So Dr. Caples left. Dr. Stovall is still here, I'm sorry. Dr. Businger, our provost here at Auburn, is also here. Also, a few deans that are here. Dr. Bashir from Agriculture is here. Dr. June Hinton from the College of Human Sciences is here. Dr. Shepard from the College of Forestry is here. And also we have interim dean, Dr. Fred Hoare, who is also joining us here today. So we give all of them applause for being here. Before I call on Dr. Businger to introduce our keynote speaker, let me just say again, over the past few months, really over the past year or so, I know that my staff, and many of us has been spending a lot of time engaging in conversations with Tuskegee University, and also looking forward to ongoing conversations with Alabama and A&M. But we just think that we're at a great moment to really explore some great collaborative partnerships. We know that we've done a lot of great things in the past, and we also know that the past has its ups and downs. But when we think about the future and what our state could look like, I think it's important for us to really, begin exploring a partnership that will be built around trust. And you heard that earlier today, that this word trust was tossed around. And I stand before you today to say that that's what I like to stand for with this partnership, because there's too much intellectual muscle that is here in this state. And if we bring it down a little tighter here to say between Auburn and Tuskegee alone, only 12, 15 miles that separate us, we have to be bold enough to step outside of our comfort zones and to explore meaningful partnerships. And thank you. And I think that we're well on our way to doing that. And what better way to start exploring these partnerships and doing some big and bold things by starting here today with this celebration of the Morrill Act. And so again, thank you all for coming here today. We have a great keynote that's on tap, and at this time I will ask Dr. Businger to come forward and introduce our keynote speaker. Thank you.
It's an honor to be with you today as we celebrate the 150-year anniversary of the Morrill Act. And I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Peter McPherson, the current president of the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. His distinguished career of public service began following his graduation from Michigan State University when he served in the Peace Corps as a volunteer in Peru in the mid-60s. Upon his return from the Peace Corps, Dr. McPherson earned a master's in business administration from Western Michigan University, followed by a law degree from American University of Washington. A few of his many prominent political experiences include serving as special assistant to President Gerald Ford and later as general counsel to the Reagan-Bush administration, which led to several administrative positions, one most notable as head of USAID from 1981 to 1987, where his efforts resulted in several programs directed at supporting famine relief in Africa. In addition to his many political leadership positions, Dr. McPherson's unique blend of business practices, law, and social issues have enabled him to serve in several prominent leadership positions, including chair of the board of directors of Dow Jones and Company, co-chair of the Partnership to Cut Hunger and Poverty in Africa, chair of the board of IFDC, an international center dealing with soil fertility and agricultural development, chair of the board of Harvest Plus, an organization working on breeding crops for better nutrition, and arguably the most impressive, Dr. McPherson served as president of his alma mater, Michigan State University, from 1993 to 2004. Since assuming the role of APLU president, Dr. McPherson successfully championed the implementation of the College Portrait Program, a program designed to allow four-year institutions to share meaningful information in easily manageable ways. A few notes on awards and honors that he has received: the U.S. Presidential Certificate for Outstanding Achievement, Secretary of State's Distinguished Leadership Award, Department of Treasury's Alexander Hamilton Award, and the UNICEF Award for Outstanding Contribution to Child Survival. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Peter McPherson.
Well, thank you, Tim. It's good to be back here at this wonderful university and to see all of you. I think last time I was here, I was at the guest of Dean Hinton and international programs, which Auburn has so many excellent activities in this area. I certainly am extremely impressed at the three universities getting together, the three land-grant universities of this state. I don't know that I've ever seen anything quite like this, sometimes two, but never three. And rarely has the spirit and the we got to get it done together have I ever seen exhibited as well as the first couple hours I was able to attend your programs today. It's an interesting problem that I know you're working on, is how do you get together, work together, but make it deeper and stronger and sustainable. I mean, every one of these partnerships are special and unique and demanding, but in the end, I think the focus a few times, several times this morning, on individual problems that the state has before us is probably the way to, excuse me, I should have turned this off. I bet nobody here has ever done this before, have you? The individual problems you're focusing on and trying to solve, because I think that partnerships ultimately, that problems to be solved are ultimately bigger than the parties or the partnerships that they're in, and it's what ends up driving. What are big problems you need to get done and how to work together? I remember it, this is now a lot of years ago, but when I was at Michigan State, Michigan State, and Wayne University, which is a very large urban university in Detroit, we all had a major interest in bio research and the physical sciences, particularly medical sides of things. We all had medical schools, and we were sorting through how we could, and we knew there were some specific problems that we could work together on. But it always helps when there's money, of course. It came together when the tobacco settlement came out, and Michigan got $400 million a year. I remember sitting in my office with my colleagues there saying, $400 million can never come into the state of Michigan without us getting some cut. This is net new money. And we ended up persuading the governor that he should give us $50 million a year, which they did for about 10 years. But we specifically said large part of that money was the purchase of joint equipment, physical facilities and equipment that were to be shared. And that was the deal in which we did it. Now, as always, it's a lot easier when you got a lot of money. And that was a large amount of money for us. But I'm convinced that relationship, even though the money is basically gone, continues. because you got joint activity that was planned and agreed to. So how do you do it here, where there's no large amount of money, one assumes, but there certainly are problems, and there is capacity here. Anyway, I was excited. It's good to see others here, like your Black Belt Foundation, your representative from Clemson, and I'm sure others here too. This is quite a meeting. And of course, it's so very appropriate to have such a meeting at the 150th anniversary of the original Morrill Act. I'd like to spend here's the way I'd like to go about this today, if you will. I'd like to talk a little bit about the history. I'll try very hard not to repeat what people have said, but I've thought a lot about this now for quite a while. Let me give a little bit of why the land grant, why the 1862, and then spreading, why this legislation came about. Two, I'd like to suggest that we're in a time of enormous changes in higher education in this country. It's going to happen fast, and I'm going to spend some time on where I think that all takes us. First of all, the history. There were three ideas, pressures that came together to create this legislation. One, the much debated point that the federal government, and state governments for that matter too, but the federal government was the point in question at the time, had a role in economic development of the country. There was not full agreement in the early decades of our country, early generations, but it was always advanced. I would argue that going way back to Alexander Hamilton's argument to create a national bank, to create a bunch of things that he did, was saying, well, he clearly was saying, the federal government has a role. But the argument continued to evolve. We shouldn't forget that President Lincoln was a Whig. And Henry Clay and his American Plan in the 1820s and that period thereafter argued that the federal government had a role in creating a railroad system and canals and generally play a role in economic development. But you can see the idea that we should expand, get an education, the federal government, was a natural extension of all this. Again, it wasn't an easy question. Many thought the Morrill Act was an unconstitutional role for the federal government to play. So that was one, this underlying philosophy, federal government had a role. Two was the question of scientific agriculture being necessary to strengthen and indeed help save the agriculture system of this country. We forget that by the 1840s, 50s, into the 60s, that agricultural production was falling in places like Maine and Vermont and so forth, the Northeast, on wheat and corn. The cotton production per acre, actually much in the South was beginning to fall by the 1850s because there wasn't a widespread application of, quote, scientific agriculture. So people like Senator Morrill of Vermont had been arguing that we should promulgate these practices more broadly. In much of the country, that's where the state fairs, the county fairs came first about, because it was an idea. The agricultural societies in many states said, we've got to figure out how to get people to adopt these practices. So by this, again, had been debated, and by 1868, actually into the 50s, and then the 62. But the idea of promulgating scientific agriculture easily led, of course, into what we now call extension, but also research. And early on, and there was an idea, we didn't know everything. So we had ideas of scientific agriculture, but The scientific method, of course, in the mining was well established as a method and approach by that time. Not as broadly as it became. So the second thrust and push for the Land Grant Act was this idea that we had to broaden technical education, which it was agriculture, but not talked about as much, was also what was called mechanical arts, namely engineering. The third idea, which has been perhaps the most powerful, not taking away the other two, but the third idea for the pressure to do this with the democratization, the further democratization of this country. America has always been a project and process in many ways, a process of making. Our expansion of individual rights and empowerment and opportunity has never been a complete project, and I surely do not think is. So step by step, we expanded voting rights. Lots of steps that you can write a history about the country around rights and democracy, and many people, of course, had. But the idea of educating the sons and daughters of ordinary people was a democratization expansion, clearly. So those ideas, look, the federal government should have a role in economic development, the technology being important to this country, and democratization all came together. So by 1862, this had extraordinarily strong support, and it went on. It was not, as I said, much of America has been a work in progress, and further steps were, of course, the 1890s, a project still a work in process, as we've discussed today. It was the GI Bill, it was the Pell Grants, and so on. So when you think about our land-grant universities, think about them as not sort of a spontaneous, independent creation. It is, in fact, part of a long history of the work of progress of this country. And I like to think about this that way, among other reasons, because we have work to do, as discussed today. These concepts, this role in economic development, this role in empowerment of people, of democratization, is what we're really all about. So let me talk about where we're going. These pressures, there's lots of pressures on us, some of which I've been discussing. And it's my judgment that higher education in this country, particularly public higher education, is going to change over the next 5 to 7, you pick the year, than any other time since the major buildup of public universities after World War II. And I think that because even if the economy recovers, we're not going to have the money per student that we once had. Among other things, we got a lot more students. But the financials, we're going to be financially stressed to do what we've done plus. I think that the other factor here is that there is the means to change that will be pressure on us, and namely is technology. I'm not one of those that thinks that technology is the answer to everything. I know there's enormous history that suggests that the technology we think will drive and change everything often It doesn't work quite the way we thought. I remember as an undergraduate, I had a TV course in Accounting 101, which I thought was sort of silly at the time, but I remember at the time folks thought that would be the answer. Well, I don't think we quite know how this will all work, and it won't work exactly according to plan, I'm convinced. But between money, the lack of money, the technology, I should add probably a third, we're going to have a lot more students. We have to educate a lot more students. Between those three factors, I think will come together in such a fashion that our commitment as public institutions to perform our public purpose, having the tools and having pressures, will do a lot. I think it will come faster than we think, because the history of true technological shifts almost always come faster than people think. I had the pleasure of being the chair of the Dow Jones board before it was sold to News Corp 5 years ago. Dow Jones is the publisher of the Wall Street Journal. And this is a great paper, at least in my view, and it's been a very profitable paper for a long period of time. But then along came the reading a paper on the web. When you move a subscriber from print reading to reading on the web, you lose 85% of the advertising revenue. 85%. Now, the paper, there's an involved industry, but you go back 10 years, and the newspaper industry looked pretty good. The big papers. New York Times, Washington Post are really struggling. If you could see the separate finances for the Wall Street Journal, which you can't now since they're part of a bigger corporation, we worked very hard to get ahead of the curve, and frankly, along came a buyer that was willing to pay $60 a share when the market price was $36. It was a great deal to sell, that's for sure. But what I was struck with there is we were struggling to adjust. We were down to 56% of our revenue was print revenue before we sold. We worked really hard to get out of solely relying upon print. But colleges and universities are going to be facing this same kind of situation. They already are in some ways. There's a story on Inside Higher Education this morning that Antioch College, which has a branch in Los Angeles, has worked out a deal with Coursera where they will buy the MOOCs courses and they will deliver them apparently in Los Angeles or greater area. They will provide faculty advisor to students, but much of the course delivery per se will be MOOCs. They're going to charge for these courses, but they have a specific goal of charging less than their target is community college graduates. So these are upper level courses, and their charge to students is specifically going to undercut California State University. So I'm not saying that's the ultimate model. What I would argue is that this is a process of this is going to happen quickly, in my view. Now we can respond to it. You all and your universities are working away at this, and everybody is exploring where technology fits. They're exploring hybrid courses. They're exploring lots of things. And some schools are doing very interesting work already. I look at the Math Emporium that some of you have seen at Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech doesn't teach freshman calculus the traditional way at all anymore. You're a Virginia Tech student, you take that freshman calculus course, It's a self-paced computer course and you see a faculty member once a week if you desire. And Frank, I've been there, nobody shows up. But you know what that student has learned. I mean, it isn't 4 or 5 tests during the semester and then you give the student a grade. You know what the student learned. And it costs less to deliver and the outcomes are higher. We really struggle, by and large, the universities to do freshman calculus very well. For lots of reasons we don't need to go in. But in terms of, it's a weeder course almost. And frankly, I found at Michigan State that too often I had students that gone to good high schools, gotten good grades, and they struggled with first year calculus. I never accepted the faculty view that for the math department that these kids weren't smart enough. This can help solve some of our problems. In short, we're going to go through, in my belief, huge changes. Now, any time where you go through tremendous change, there is a chance there'll be some schools that will get better, maybe a lot better in terms of outcomes, and some schools that get worse. In this environment, they might get a lot worse. The situation might be a lot harder. But it's an opportunity is what I'm saying. Someone this morning talked about the technology being an equalizer. Well, technology in this new environment is going to be an equalizer for universities. I believe that, and I think it's important. Well, we're driven to this by technology, market forces, etc. And I think it's clear that those that lead will have a much better chance of winning. Winning meaning successfully performing our public function, public purpose. I believe that in conjunction with, but it's worth looking at it sort of separately, we're going to have to expand the number of degrees and the quality education we provide. As a country, we're about 40% of our working age population with degrees. A number of countries on the younger set of people, aged 25 to 34, already have more than we have. Canada, Korea, several countries. I think in this world we've got to do better. The President, Lumina, College Board have all talked about higher levels. I think many of you know that ASCU and APLU put together a statement, a commitment statement. Just a few weeks ago, we announced it, where 500 public 4-year universities and colleges signed it, I think including everybody here, where we committed to do our part to reaching 60% by 2025 of the population having a degree, associate or 4-year degree or above. Well, how we do that is an interesting thing to think about together today, isn't it? I mentioned the technology, and I think technology will play a role because we'll be able to reach out to students we haven't reached out as much as we should. Frankly, the for-profit universities aren't enrolling people because they're the cheapest. Contrary, of course. There's a market position, if you want to use market kind of terminology, for us to reach out, and if we can do it in a quality way. But I'm intrigued with places like Arizona State University and some others that are using technology to carefully track, and a lot of people are doing this in various ways, One, everybody has to have on their website a way for students to know what it's going to cost. We're not that far from pretty much everybody having it available on their campus, and I think some of you already do, a way for students to regularly check where they are in getting toward graduation. Well, there's another further step that Arizona State has taken, and that is to track it even more carefully and tell students regularly whether they're on track or not, and to essentially have a flag come up if they try to enroll in a course that doesn't count toward a degree. I mean, this certainly shouldn't be some central prescription how you do this, but it's clear that if we can put together the quality education, sufficient outreach, track it, and so forth, we ought to be able to do much higher completion levels than we're currently doing. Now, our graduation rates are understated because the current Department of Education graduation rate doesn't count transfers in and out. Most of you all of you, I think, are part of the clearinghouse data, and your clearinghouse completion data is much, much better. But in short, to summarize these comments about the last part of the speech, I believe that a similar speech or gathering in 5 to 7 years will be working in a different world. And I believe that some institutions will be relatively better off and some will be worse off. It may not be absolutely clear in 5 to 7 years which are which, but the seeds will be there. And in 10 years, in my belief, it certainly will be clear. I think that we have an obligation coming from this America, a work in progress, and democratization of the Morrill Act, to really rise to this occasion, because I think there's so much to do. And again, to conclude, and I'd welcome any comments, questions you would have. I really congratulate you for planning, for getting together as you have. My guess is, as I said in the opening, that the real success is going to come from focusing on problems that are pressing, that need to be solved, and sort of causing and saying we all got to get together to work on those problems. Let me finish with that. I know someone will have a question or two. It's good to be back here again. Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you. You probably ought to talk a little louder because I'm sure these folks can't hear you.
Oh, okay, I can talk louder. I just wanted to say that I am so impressed and touched by your career and the things that you've chosen to focus on during your life for really the betterment of the whole world. And your comments today about our higher education institutions are sad, because I think that in this area, maybe someone knows the numbers better than I, but in the last 10, 15 years, the cost of a university education at Auburn University is 200 to 300% increase. So that, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but so that this university that we are sitting in now has pretty much become for the children of the wealthy, and or the children with a huge debt when they graduate. And I don't know what the answer to that is, because I don't believe that administrators are in touch with the burden on the sons and daughters of normal working day folk, you know, that they're not really in touch with the needs of those people. And I am sorry, and I am ashamed of Auburn University, because I went here when it was affordable. When I started in 1965, it was $150 a quarter for tuition and $150 a quarter for room and board. And I would
Well,
like someone at Auburn University to stand up and tell me how much it is now per semester if they have the nerve. But anyway,
Well-
you're a wonderful personality to bring people together, whereas I'm not so good.
well, well, I'm sure Tim will stand up in a moment and tell us exactly. But I think that it's worth realizing, maybe, Tim, if you'd like to comment, but I think it's worth realizing that the sticker tuition price is much, much higher than the net tuition, which is after Pell and other and institutional grants. I'll bet your net tuition price here is what, 3, 2, something like that, thousand a year. And but the net tuition, what would it be?
Well, it's 8,000 for in-state, 24,000 for out-of-state.
No, but that's the sticker tuition. But then but your actual cost, when you take out the grants and the rest of it, would be about how much a student? And how much? Half. And then you look at the, so for an in-state, it'd be about $4,000. So then you look at the average debt of a graduate here, and at least if it's like publics broadly, it's going to be in the range of $20,000. So it's not what we like. And when I was an undergraduate at Michigan State, I think I paid $125 a term. Of course, that was a long, long time ago. But I went to Michigan State in 1958. But we need to start off with realizing what the facts are. State appropriations around the country, tuition around the country has been raised at approximately the level of the amount of cuts that the state have made to the universities per student. The thing is that public universities in this country have 23% more students than they did 10 years ago. So when you adjust for the number of student increases, this will all vary by universities, state tuition is roughly increased at a level required to make up for the state cuts. Now, do I think this can be sustained? No. And I think we're going to continue to grow. I think we're going to, I think some of our costs are going to continue to increase. Healthcare, for example. I think we've got to figure out how to do it less expensively. There's going to always be students that want to come to a traditional Ivy Leafy kind of campus experience, and there'll be some resources in their family or otherwise to do that. But there's going to be other students that can't, or because of where they are in their life can't do it anyway. So how do we give those students an experience? I think we're going to find, I'm not trying to tell you what your individual university should do. I found that's a losing proposition to try. But I do think that broadly, many traditional institutions will keep that traditional experience. But even within that campus or outside of it, coordination with it, we're going to be delivering a lot more technology-driven hybrid kinds of experiences. If we're going to increase our student graduation rates like we've talked about, there's no option, because there's not going to be money to do it in the traditional way. I don't think universities have been, I know, I struggled with tuition decisions for 11 years. I know we have a deep belief we got to keep the tuition down. But I know the current structure of delivering undergraduate education, there's limits to how much we can cut. There has to be some change of model. Tim, I don't mean to talk to here on your campus about what you should or shouldn't be doing. Do you have any comments to add to all this? This is a very good man, by the way. Hi.
It is expensive to go to college with a land grant university. I think the university finds itself in a bind, declining support from the state. Are we going to maintain the quality of our programs at the level they've been at, or are we going to not be as competitive? And so the decision's been made that we're going to be as competitive as we can be. Speaking of competition, we are right at the mean with our peers in tuition. So Auburn, I think, has managed its resources in a frugal way, and as best we can. We've gotten through, like other universities, we've gotten through some really tough times. We're hopeful, thinking about future tuition increases, we're hopeful that state support will just hold steady, then there's a lot more we could do to help students with access and to do financial support. So I think these are all important issues. We wrestle with these every day.
I think this question of how we change, how we adjust to this world, is a key one, and I know you're working with it. Can we actually reduce the cost of delivery for some components? What we do? What does the MOOCs, the Coursera stuff mean to our schools? I believe that, and it's very threatening in some ways to our current institutions. I believe we're going to find some of those upper class courses, we're just going to incorporate some of this work. And I believe that we're going to use more computer-based courses for these large student freshman first-year courses in biology and math and chemistry and physics. It's a struggle. Other questions? Probably not a fully satisfactory answer, ma'am, but there we are. I'm glad you brought it up, right up here up front.
You mentioned, I thought it was mentioned by the person during the bio, that you essentially started out as part of the B School, your interest,
Right.
your career. Could you talk a little bit about that? How did you become, how did you manage to be where you are when you started out giving away your time to people of law?
Well, I think most of the people around this room are, to one degree or the other, a little idealistic, aren't you? I think you're driven by wanting to do good, wanting to make the world better, and I've liked to make money, that's for sure. But I also have always felt that there was some things that the world needed to have done. I grew up at a farm in West Michigan. Milked those cows morning and night till I went to college. Along the way, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer, by the way. And then the Peace Corps just sounded so exciting to go off. And I had not been to, when I graduated from college, the only place abroad I'd been was across the Windsor Bridge into Canada. And that's true for most of our students. Most of our students at your schools haven't been abroad. I'm a huge proponent of study abroad, by the way. We decided a couple years into my time at Michigan State, we would reach 40% of our graduates having a study abroad experience. And Michigan State's a huge place, 47,000 students now. And of course, there's lots of discussion. How can we probably, well, we say, well, look, we're going to throw the spear out. We're going to make this public commitment. Well, we now send about 3,000 students abroad a year, and it's made a huge impact on campus. I know you've worked hard on each one of your campuses, but I think the study abroad experience is the equivalent of, because what so much about learning, we all know this, is it's coming to understand what your possibilities are. People have, by and large, more possibilities than they understand when they're young. And if we can open that door, it's quite something. And study abroad does that in an amazing way for a huge percentage of these students. Other questions back here?
Arizona State and Virginia Tech as big innovators and kind of changing with the times. Are there any other examples you can share that you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of examples. I've been very impressed with Florida State, for example. Tim's friend Larry Abel down there was provost for 10 years, and I think what Florida State's done in terms of increasing graduation rates over and above the expected levels is just impressive. And they did that by spending a lot of effort in determining how to best allocate their resources and their time. Does student advising versus a few weeks before the year for disadvantaged students pay the most in outcomes? The attention on student outcomes there is extraordinary. I think that San Diego State, over a 15-year period, has done quite impressive things. In the case of Florida, it was largely not only African Americans. In the case of San Diego State, it was largely not only Hispanic students. I believe that most schools are paying some real attention to the Math Emporium idea. Math Emporium at Virginia Tech has been in place for 15 years. And I'm in some ways surprised it isn't more broadly adopted, but I see it being looked at. There's lots of places in this country that are really paying attention to the role of evidence-based decision-making, allocation of resources, focusing on outcomes, retention, graduation rates as we haven't historically, using technology to do all this and plus delivery. Other comment, questions right here. Well, here's what happens exactly. It's worth some of you going to see it. Probably many of you already have. But we're all poor, so we always have to. I always say Harvard doesn't make mistakes; they just learn lessons. But for us, we have to struggle, don't we? So, right next to the campus was an old department store, Virginia Tech's, an old department store that went out of business. So the university buys it for a song, and several floors, and they put computers, rows of computers in there that students can use 18 hours a day. We got to remember that students have different hours of work than most of us do. So you come in and there's sometimes a faculty member there for the whole building, but usually on the floor is upperclassmen. So they're, in the scheme of things, they're relatively inexpensive. And the student goes in, checks out, he or she, And if you get a question, they got a very simple process. They got a cup you put on top of your desk right there so the proctor can see you have a question. And it works through, so you struggle, you don't get something wrong, up pops a half a dozen examples you can work through or helps answer questions. Very engaged. You have to work at it. It isn't passive learning at all. Then, as I said earlier, once a week, a faculty member is available. So they're teaching all their math, all their freshman math, all the freshman calculus, and so forth. Now, it's worth really looking at because of the outcomes. But we're going to see this University of Maryland and some of the colleges, universities in the SUNY system in New York have this last semester worked on a statistics course. They found the outcomes were comparable to the old method of teaching statistics. The costs were less. Many feel that when they try it again, the outcomes will even be even better. What I love about some of these computer courses, and I do think most of them need to have a hybrid component to it. It's sort of hard to keep 18-year-olds motivated all the time without seeing anybody. But I love the idea that if you take a computer or a component of a computer course at a community college, then it's much easier to calculate whether you should transfer the credit because you know what they learned. Other questions? Over here.
Downward spiral in this respect, in which they become more and more elite-style institutions, which they were specifically intended to differentiate themselves in the 19th century. So I was wondering, that is from the perspective you've gained as a university president, someone who's circulated in many of the higher councils of society, if there is any kind of way of reversing this trend, of increasing public support for the missions which were first enunciated by Morrill, ratified by Lincoln?
Well, it is the core question, isn't it, or one of the core questions. It's absolutely true that the states haven't kept up with the historical bargain of appropriating money per student consistent with what they have done in the past. And what we've done, I think those are the facts. State appropriations on a per student basis have fallen steadily and particularly sharply the last couple of years. What we've done is to say we're going to raise tuition to make up for these state losses. And the dollars are amazingly close nationally that we've raised tuition to make up for the state appropriation loss. So we say to the state, wait a minute, give us more money. And the state says, well, we got prisons, we've got health care costs, we can't give you more. And besides, we see you get along with the money that you're getting. And some states are saying implicitly, well, make up the difference by raising tuition. It's the devil's bargain. Because, in fact, we undercut. It's not just so much the public support, that's true, but we also end up, if we're not careful, defeating why we all believe in public universities. It's the public purpose to which we have to keep on coming back, as you talked this morning in this session. I think there is no good, clear answer, but I hope today, what I want to do today was suggest there are some ways in which we can, and I believe will, many will, not all, will educate more students, will have a higher quality at somewhat less cost. And those that are able to do that will be winners, and those that aren't will be relative losers. It does cost money to do things, but we've got to drive to do it as best we can for as little resources we can. You know, this has never been an easy deal. As we look back at 1862, when the act was put in place, for decades, land-grant universities struggled. And every generation has found its challenges. We've talked this morning about the challenges of the 1890s. This is not going to be an easy thing, and the reason I am relatively confident, more confident than I was 10 years ago, that we are likely to be able to get this done, is because these factors have come together to press us so hard. The cut in resources, our philosophical, policy, idealistic desire to get it done, and the fact that there's some tools available to do it that are clearly workable that weren't there 10 years ago. So I don't come to you as pessimistic, really. I come to you with the deep conviction that things will be different in 5 and 10 years. And I want us to be winners and contributors. Thank you so much. Take care.
All right, thank you, Dr. McPherson, for those remarks. Lastly, I would like to also recognize ACEs here. Dr. Paul Brown, I forgot to mention you earlier, but you and several others, Dr. Creighton and Virginia, thank you all for being here. I'll just leave you quickly. I know everyone is ready to go, but we heard about the challenges. We hear about access to public education. We know that there are a whole host of challenges that we'll be faced with in the future as public institutions. But it's just sort of like the way I started. I think that those challenges can easily be addressed if you work together, and that working together is built around trust. I hope y'all have a great day.